Number 5. Gordon Cooper. Major Gordon Cooper was an astronaut and flying ace of considerable renown, with more than a few accolades to his name, being the first man to spend a full 24 hours in space solo and the last American to ever spend a solo orbit around the planet altogether. Besides these lofty accomplishments, he was also very vocal about his belief and insistence of life beyond the stars. He'd experienced many strange things over his career. First, when he was an Air Force pilot in 1951, he says on a routine flight over West Germany, he encountered 3 flying metallic saucers following his plane. The incident was reported and nothing was done. But this would be far from the last strange encounter Cooper would have. In 1963, after orbiting the planet, Cooper was returning home when he noticed a glowing green orb following his capsule, which he described as ethereal. The object was picked up by a radar tracking station in Australia. But most bizarre about all of this is that when Major Cooper touched down and returned home, reporters from NBC told him they were explicitly barred from asking any questions about the unidentified object he'd experienced. Beyond bizarre, isn't it? Cooper outright says he believes higher-ups covered it up, saying on record that in the USA every day our radar instruments capture objects of form and composition unknown to us. And there are thousands of witness reports and a quantity of documents to prove this, but nobody wants to make them public. Why? Because authority is afraid that people may think up God knows what kind of horrible invaders. We have to avoid panic by all means. Now, the implication in his words seem pretty direct, that he thinks the government covers it up because they think we can't handle it. I think we're ready. I mean, after the last couple years, I don't think there's any weirdness you can really throw at us. And if you're looking for great weirdness and great horror content every day, well, I can hook you up with that. All you gotta do is subscribe. Number 4. Ryan Graves. Now, for most of us, seeing a UFO would probably be the highlight of our life, or at the very least our week. But for Lieutenant Ryan Graves, a 10-year Navy veteran, seeing a UFO became a routine. On an interview with CBS on their 60 Minutes, Lieutenant Graves said that he saw UFOs every single day for years. He recounts his first encounter, where he was stunned, saying he saw a mysterious flying object trailing around him, with no markings on it, no exhaust plume, no trail of any kind. He described it as a flying black cube that appeared to have a sphere located inside of it. The pilots in Graves' squadron would report seeing these mysterious cubes constantly during their training exercise, even coming dangerously close to crashing into them and causing them to be labeled a threat. Graves said initially they were skeptical about them being alien craft, which is reasonable, and that his men had been assuming they were highly advanced drones being tested clandestinely. But as time goes on, Graves changed his tune, instead advocating for the discussion to be had about UFOs and if there's more to know out there. He wants to centralize the conversation around UFOs not being an outlandish conspiracy theory, but more of a security concern. But are they really, even? I mean, surely if there was alien life capable of provoking a conflict, they would have done it by now, right? Or perhaps these crafts were just scouts, or something else entirely. All I want to know is the truth. Number 3. Cosmonaut Kovalyonok. When you leave the atmosphere, you should expect to see some things you can't explain. I mean, it's up in space. Well, for Vladimir Kovalyonok, he was in orbit in the summer of 1978. He saw something that would alter his perception of reality forever. He claimed that he saw some floating entity following around the space station, reporting a glowing green ethereal orb, exactly like what Major Gordon Cooper claims to have seen following his capsule. Much like Major Cooper, that wouldn't be the only supernatural extraterrestrial experience Kovalyonok experienced. In 1981, on another voyage through the stars, he saw something unimaginable. He claims that he saw something floating around, resembling a barbell. He said that it was transparent, but that it looked like it had a body inside of it. It did something that is very difficult for me to describe in the point of view of physics. He describes the entity exploding magnificently, combusting in a ray of golden light, which he described as beautiful. After the explosions, there was a cloud of white smoke and a small sphere, but as they continued orbiting, the smoke and sphere vanished entirely. He goes on to say that he doesn't think whatever he saw was artificial, and that it must have been biological in some way, that it moved in a way that intoned life of some kind. Kovalyonok was surprised that his fellow cosmonauts did not seem willing to entertain the possibility of it being life from outside the planet, outright dismissing his claims. He's been quoted saying, "Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years, I never spoke on such things." When he returned home, there were brief investigations that possibly what Kovalyonok saw was little more than a missile test. And after these brief investigations, the case and the sighting was dropped entirely. Number 2. Exoplanet. Now, it's frustrating, I'm sure, to think that there could be answers for the unexplained out there, and no one is willing to share them with us, out of fear we'd react badly. For one Gary McKinnon, this unknowing was simply too much to bear, and he decided to get the answers the only way he knew how, the easy way, hacking directly into NASA's servers to get at their data. Why would he do that? Why would he risk his whole life and career for this? For the truth, directly. From McKinnon's own mouth, he said, "I knew that governments suppressed anti-gravity UFO-related technologies, free energy, or what they call zero-point energy. This sort of thing should not be kept hidden from the public when pensioners can't pay their fuel bills." So did he find anything worth risking his freedom for? Well, according to Mr. McKinnon, yes he did. He claims to have found something called the Disclosure Project, a 400-page document outlining testimonials from all kinds of government agents reporting their sightings and findings on unexplained objects. Fantastically too, Mr. McKinnon claims that he got a hold of a document entitled Non-Terrestrial Officers, listing the names of NASA officers who were to be transferred to new ships. However, McKinnon stated that he could not find the name of any of these ships existing anywhere elsewhere. McKinnon, as well, presumably incredibly satisfied with his findings, vandalized one of NASA's websites, leaving behind a message saying, "Your security is crap, by the way." Utterly hilarious, but it did come back to bite him, as the White Hat hacker was swiftly arrested and was to be extradited to the United States to stand trial there. Now, the 56-year-old managed to avoid extradition. He still lives in the United Kingdom today, but he's definitely going to want to avoid visiting the US anytime soon, as I sincerely doubt they've forgotten about that little bit of vandalism. Number 1. The UAP report. Well, it's hard-pressed to find any more clear-cut proof that the US government has been researching aerial phenomena and UFOs than the US government outright admitting they've been researching UFOs and aliens for years and releasing all of the documents about it, kind of quietly sliding it underneath the door. Now, the actual idea of the report sounds significantly more exciting than it actually is, sadly. It's still very, 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 very cool, don't get me wrong. But the Pentagon's UAP report isn't quite the smoking ray gun we would hope it is. It doesn't outright blatantly confirm anything. It doesn't point to one flying saucer with a big red circle and say, "Hey, this is an alien. We know this is an alien. We asked for its name. It came from Sanhelos and it comes in peace." Instead, the report highlights the hundreds of documented official reports of strange occurrences pilots and other government agents have seen in their service. The report confirms it's something we're looking at. It's done wonders to legitimize the talk around UFOs. First and foremost, to change the nomenclature from UFO, unidentified flying object, to UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, including the possibility of non-technological flying things. The report focuses primarily on whether or not repeated sightings of mysterious crafts are a threat or dangerous, which is a bit reductive, I think. Why do we have to assume aliens are a threat to us? Now, this isn't the first time the government has put direct resources into researching the possibility of alien life. Most famously probably is Project Blue Book, a CIA task force that ran from 1952 to 1959. But this is the first time an agency has been so outright forthcoming about sharing their findings with the public, renewing interest in UFO and UAPs. It's a very, very strong path forward to legitimate discussions, finding, and who knows what else. Number 5. SCP-2019. Our first SCP featured on today's list is Euclid class organism SCP-2019. This sapient cubical organism appears to us as a green gelatinous substance held in place by a thick, transparent membrane. The cube stands 5 meters by 5 meters by 5 meters and is housed deep inside foundation walls and kept unconscious through round-the-clock sedatives and fed intravenously. SCP-2019 is highly resistant, despite its unassuming appearance. Any damage it incurs, it regenerates quickly in a matter of seconds. On the forward-facing side of the cube, there are 37 eyes resembling human eyes. SCP-2019 is able to move these eyes freely through the membrane in order to see around itself in a 360-degree radius. SCP-2019 has been recorded to sprout tentacular limbs of sorts to allow itself to move. belief. Now, SCP-2019 displays an interesting creation ability, being able to conjure physical objects and even organic beings into reality. The most occurring evidence of this power is its tendency to grow additional brains. During regular monitoring, it's been recorded to grow additional brains at a rate of once every 2 months under favorable conditions. In order to keep SCP-2019 docile, the Foundation has been ordered to always limit it to 1 brain at a time, with all extraneous ones being removed surgically. SCP-2019 is highly intelligent. Interviews with SCP-2019 have been illuminating. While SCP-2019 cannot verbalize directly, it is able to communicate with signs and visualizations, allowing us to understand it better. SCP-2019 has told us that it was banished by the rest of its species for being an outsider, and that its home is far away from here. Although it has been prone to acts of aggression around Foundation staff, it will still be contained for study and general protection. Now, as always, the Foundation thanks you greatly for your interest. If you'd like to stay informed and stay protected, please consider subscribing to Top 5 Scary. Number 4. SCP-2020. SCP-2020 is a Euclid-class entity, a sapient bipedal humanoid entity standing approximately 7 feet tall. It possesses unnaturally long and thin limbs, and I am not describing myself, and it most closely resembles descriptions of little gray men that have been reported over the years. It's likely that SCP-2020 or a member of its species are what was spotted during the Roswell incident. SCP-2020 is composed primarily of a natural form of rubber that appears to serve all bodily functions: musculature, circulatory, and skeletal. SCP-2020 maintains a very simple diet, subsisting solely on paper and water for sustenance. Interestingly, in all time since the Foundation began observing SCP-2020, it has not displayed any visible signs of aging or any signs of growth. Further studies of its biology have been halted, as SCP-2020 is surprisingly resistant to any tearing, so sample studies cannot be collected. Research has been temporarily suspended. Socially, SCP-2020 displays several behaviors common with humans, such as its desire to learn, its desire to interact with humans, and its bizarre semi-understanding of social cues. It understands and speaks English proficiently, even answering to certain names. It's quite friendly to Foundation staff and eager to talk. It claims to have originated from an advanced extraterrestrial civilization, but repeated questioning has produced wildly varying answers from SCP-2020 on the nature of said civilization, such as its technological prowess and other details. It seems most pleased when prompted to speak of its ideas for writing, often quite enthusiastically and jovially sharing its ideas for stories to researchers who are interviewing it. It claims it has a strong desire to be a science fiction writer. Slightly amusing to Foundation scientists, when interviewed, SCP-2020 is happy to share its many ideas, but never actually feels compelled to write any of them down, complaining that it's unable to choose a concept to focus on from its many ideas. Of note, during these interviews with SCP-2020 from Foundation members are that a number of its plot ideas for stories are rife with cliché and are often unfinished and quickly thought out. Nonetheless, researchers have reported finding 2020 a pleasant conversationalist, enjoying their sessions together. Number 3. SCP-2362. SCP-2362 is a Keter-class object and is the designation of the dwarf star Pluto, an interior Kuiper belt object. Public knowledge of SCP-2362 has been suppressed, intentionally of course, in order to decrease public interest in SCP-2362. In 1983, Foundation researchers uncovered that SCP-2362, formerly designated internally as Pluto, is an organic composition functioning like a shell for something, housing an entity hereto referred to as SCP-2362-1. It is an approximately 900-kilometer long object resembling a bell-shaped mass with 13 flowing tentacles behind it, most closely resembling a jellyfish. A research probe, Orpheus, was sent towards the dwarf planet in 2006 to confirm this hypothesis that the planet was actually an organic entity. The research was fascinating. A fissure was detected on the surface of the object's southern pole, measuring approximately 50 kilometers long and 10 kilometers wide. A repeated surveillance showed the fissure growing daily, increasing in size dramatically. As in a few weeks, the fissure grew from a meager 50 kilometers long to a staggering 950 kilometers long and 370 kilometers in width. After nearly 2 months of observation, 13 masses were spotted sprouting from the southern fissure. After 52 days, the fissure widened, revealing SCP-2362, splitting into 2 halves of one shell and releasing SCP-2362-1, the jellyfish entity. Now, SCP-2362-1's motives are currently unknown, as well as any of its biological functions or drives. What little we do know of it is that it is somehow able to propel itself through space by expanding and contracting its appendages. The current trajectory that it appears to be following suggests that it will leave our solar system within the next 100 years, and as such, it is not considered a threatening object, although it will continuously be monitored by Foundation probes for your security. Number 2. SCP-163. SCP-163 is a safe class object of extraterrestrial origins. SCP-163 is a sapient organism, standing roughly 6.5 feet tall. Its body is roughly cylindrical, with a circular mouth at the bottom, an approximation of a head at the top, and 8 3-jointed legs circling around the body. SCP-163 has many specialized unique limbs to its species, including 2 prehensile feeding limbs on either side of the mouth, 2 arms near the top of its body used for delicate precision manipulating, 2 larger arms located closer to its legs used for heavier manipulation, and 2 appendages of indeterminate function located between the legs and mouths, but it appears they have been amputated prior to SCP-163's retrieval. SCP-163 was discovered crashed inside a spacecraft in the Andes Mountains and discovered by local miners. The spacecraft had largely been scavenged, but SCP-163 had been kept encased, hidden in stasis. Upon discovery, the retrieval crews brought it to the Foundation, where it was given adequate accommodations. A receiving room with an airlock with room for guests, a storage room where SCP-163 is allowed to keep approved objects, a workshop as well as a dining room, and a sleeping quarters where SCP-163 can rest. SCP-163 displays very good behavior. Its outstanding good behavior is notable by Foundation standards. As such, it is allowed to take short sabbatical trips around the facility, accompanied by a junior researcher for supervision, of course. SCP-163 and any researchers present need to be equipped with isolation suits in order to prevent any cross-contamination between species. SCP-163 displays an advanced level of intelligence, a deep understanding of its own technology, and an ability to express itself artistically when given painting supplies, and has made several attempts to communicate with Foundation personnel. Difficulties have arisen, of course, because SCP-163 is unable to verbalize and only has a rudimentary ability to gesture by furrowing its skin slightly. One of the more docile entries housed by Foundation walls, SCP-163 has been an indelible asset in growing to understand our place in the universe. Number 1. SCP-1281. SCP-1281 is a large safe class object, a biomechanical entity that was found during a routine containment operation of SCP-2362, if you remember from earlier. SCP-1281 is a vaguely teardrop-shaped entity, measuring roughly 12 meters from end to end and 11 meters across. It's spotted with dish-shaped structures on the surface that presumably serve to function as receivers for electromagnetic energy. Several elements and fragments of other mechanical parts are present across the surface of SCP-1281, intimating that more appendages were present at one point, possibly having been damaged. The biological elements of SCP-1281 appear to have grown completely over a technological mechanical frame designed to live in deep space. It's theorized that SCP-1281 was designed for deep space interstellar travel, but a majority of its essential systems had been damaged by unknown sources. Carbon dating has suggested that SCP-1281 is upwards of 1.3 billion years old. SCP-1281 attempted several times to broadcast a message to Foundation researchers, initially broadcasting solely simple binary codes and mathematical concepts. Eventually, it was able to maintain a conversation with our researchers, where it revealed that itself had been sent to share a message from its creator. Paraphrasing slightly, it spoke of its home species and planet that had died off, and wanted to relay its message to other species to warn them, telling them that they must light the darkness. Through SCP-1281, which was known as the Harbinger from its species, this lost species is able to live on in a way, if only through the proof of SCP-1281. After this broadcast, SCP-1281 had asked its interviewer if it had done its job well, if it had performed well. It shut off shortly thereafter. The researcher told it that it did in fact do a good job, and thanked it for its service. The researcher was reprimanded afterwards for breaking protocol for provoking an emotional response. Number 5. Rudolph Fentz. Rudolph Fentz, as the story goes, was a man who was found dead in New York in 1951, but seemed as if that wasn't where he was meant to be, and he had got there by accident, not geographically. Like time-wise. Sorry, I'm still trying to work out my time puns, my time jokes. We'll hammer all those out in editing. At 11:15 on June 1951, a man dressed in 19th century attire was seen standing in the middle of the road on a busy New York street. None of the bystanders had seen how he'd arrived there, just that he looked out of sorts, disoriented, and confused. Before anyone could intervene, the man was fatally struck by a taxi. He didn't even have time to yell, "I'm walking here." The story itself could stop here and would be an odd bit of New York history, but it was what was inside the man's pockets that only served to confuse this mystery even more? Let me list it off. On his person, Mr. Fence had a copper token for a beer worth 5 cents, bearing the name of an unknown saloon that even historians and locals couldn't identify. He had a bill for the care of a horse and the washing of a carriage, coming from a stable that wasn't listed in any address book. He had about $70 worth of vintage American banknotes, a business card with the name Rudolph Fence, bearing an address on 5th Avenue, and a letter sent to this address, dated 1876 from Philadelphia. And lastly, and maybe most confusingly, a medal for coming third in a 3-legged race. Now, although they had a surprising amount of evidence to identify the man, they couldn't find anything. The captain of the missing persons desk of the NYPD, Hubert Rim, tried everything he could to positively ID this mystery cadaver. Going to the address printed, he found that no one knew who Rudolph Fence was. Eventually, he found a Rudolph Fence Jr. in a phone book from 1938, leading the captain to trace Fence Jr., only to discover that he had passed 5 years earlier, but that his widow had survived him. Interviewing the widow, Captain Rim learned that Fence's father, one Rudolph Fence Sr., had gone missing in 1876, aged 29, and had never been found. So what happened? Did Fence slip through a temporal portal? Was it intentional? Was he abducted by aliens through time and then dropped off at another completely disconnected point in human history? Maybe. I don't know. And my friends, if you want to experience time travel at home, I've actually perfected it. Listen to what you gotta do. First, you need to get comfy. Then you need to get a snack, maybe a drink too, and then you need to click on some top 5 scary videos. Now get really comfy, get the cat, get a blanket. Next thing you know, it's gonna be 8 hours later because you are gonna be watching this stuff all day. Subscribe and tell me if my theory's right. Number 4, the man from Torrid. Picture a regular day in Tokyo. It's summer, it's hot, it's sticky, it's July, and it's 1954, and a man is trying to enter Tokyo. He isn't particularly suspicious, he's conventional looking and fairly average, but he's denied entrance into Japan and detained by the authorities. His passport looks completely genuine and legitimate, with the exception that his passport lists his country of origin as Torrid, a country no one has ever been to because it doesn't exist. So was he just forging a fake passport? Well, this is where things get a bit interesting. When asked to point out where exactly Torrid was on the map, the man angrily insisted that Torrid is exactly where Andorra is, the small landlocked country between France and Spain. He insisted that he'd never heard of Andorra, don't feel bad if you haven't, and that's where Torrid had been, and had been for the last 1,000 years. Now the Japanese officials detaining him were pretty confused, and they discovered that he had money from several different European countries on his person, and his passport, which other than the fact that it was from a country that doesn't exist, appeared totally genuine and had been stamped several times already, even by Tokyo. The police were determined to get to the bottom of what it was they were dealing with, as they were more than a bit confused, wondering if they were experiencing the world's most elaborate prank, or perhaps there was something more to the story. They contacted the company he'd worked for, and the company claimed they had never heard of him before, even though the man from Torrid had several pages worth of documents proving his employment. The hotel he had a reservation for? Never heard of him. The company he was meeting in Tokyo? Never heard of him. After a while of investigations that were only turning up more questions than answers, police returned to his hotel room to release him, only to discover that the man had vanished. No one saw him leave the hotel, and there was no way he could have escaped from the window, as the hotel room was nearly on the top floor and there were no balconies. In the years succeeding, there have been all kinds of rumors and speculations as to just what the man from Torrid was. Some have put forward that he could have been a time traveler. It's definitely possible. Another prevailing theory is that he's a man from a different timeline or a different reality altogether, who somehow fell into this one. With this line of thinking, is it unreasonable to consider that the man from Torrid wasn't from this world at all? Could he have been a visitor from another planet? Could Torrid have been the name of his planet? Our visitor's true home? I mean, maybe. Number 3, John Teeter. John Teeter is the name of a man who claimed he had traveled back in time during the 2000s. Kind of an odd time to travel back in time too, unless maybe you're hatching a complicated scheme to invest in Bitcoin. Anyway, Teeter made his post on the Time Travel Institute forum, where he claimed to be a soldier from the far-off year of 2036. We've got about 12 years to see if any of what he claimed is right, although mild spoiler warning, he's been wrong for most of it. Regardless, let's take a look together. He claims that he had been sent back in time as part of a US government operation to the year 1976, where Mr. Teeter was sent back to recover an IBM 5100 computer, as it was essential to debugging something in his timeline, or something, some time travel stuff. Now, there's a lot more working against Mr. Teeter being a time traveler than there is evidence working for him. Foremost, that a lot of his predictions for the future ended up being totally bogus. For one, he claimed there would be a civil war in the United States in the year 2005, 2005. The Civil War would grow so much into such an unstoppable force that the United States would split up into 5 main regions, and eventually the dissolution of the states would lead into World War III starting in 2015. Now, 2015 is kind of a blur for me. That's when I started college. I don't really remember a lot of it, but I don't remember World War III happening. Although Teeter himself posited that because he traveled back in time, he created a new time stream caused by this disruption, and therefore any of his predictions could end up not coming true in this altered state. It kinda sounds like an excuse to me, Mr. Teeter, but what do I know? I'm not a time traveler. I can't remember if this follows the rules they set in Avengers Endgame or not. Now, true believers and fair skeptics, is it all possible that the reason Mr. Teeter set himself backwards in time because he wasn't just looking for computer parts, but to repair some sort of alien craft? Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? Probably not. Is it very fun to speculate on the internet? Absolutely. Number 2. Victor Goddard. Royal Air Force Commander Victor Goddard was an RAF flying ace with a storied career, having flown through missions in both the First and Second World Wars, and also possibly flew through a time vortex once. Don't worry, I'll explain that. In 1935, Goddard was serving during the Second World War, flying a fairly routine mission. He was sent to check out the status of an abandoned Scottish airfield in the unremarkable village of Drem, east of Edinburgh. Sorry, Drem. If we have any Drem viewers, just know that the article I was reading for information called it unremarkable, not me. I would never say that. Goddard flew over the field, and he reported back to HQ that Drem was as unremarkable as they described. I'm so sorry. The airfield was abandoned, desolate, grass overgrown over what remaining buildings still stood, populated mostly by free-spirited cows who were grazing on grass and serving no masters. Circling back around, Goddard found himself caught in a storm that had been passing, causing him to panic for a bit and fight for control of the craft. He circled through, and as he exited the storm, he saw something he could not comprehend. He looked back down and found himself completely frozen in fear. Reporting back once again, he noted that the airfield he'd flown out to was completely restored. There were 4 biplanes in the hangar, and the cows had all been replaced with a staff of mechanics dressed in blue uniforms. The planes on the field were all painted bright yellow, unlike the usual drab silver of the RAF at the time. Goddard was beyond confused. I mean, can you blame him? Had he uncovered a secret base? Was he looking at the enemy? An ally? Was any of this even real? After a few loops around, Goddard found himself caught in the storm yet again, and this time as he exited, he noted that the airfield had returned to its default state, desolated, destroyed, once again populated by cows. The incident shocked Goddard to his core and haunted him. He tried to write about it in a biography about his life called Flight Towards Reality, but he never got any good answers about what he saw. Perhaps most confusingly about the whole ordeal is that what he reported seeing, the blue coveralled mechanics and yellow planes, would end up being the standard service wear for the RAF a few years after the incident in 1939, when the Drem airfield was also reconstructed. Is it possible somehow that Goddard managed to slip forward in time a few years? Was he caught in a vortex? Was the cloud perhaps some sort of unbelievable extraterrestrial technology that he was simply swept up in something larger than himself? Or was the whole experience a product of too much coffee before a mission and not enough sleep? Number 1. Mike Markham. In the best movies, time travel is perfected by one lone scientist working around the clock in a garage tirelessly, perhaps just a little bit off of his rocker. Now, don't think I'm passing judgment at all here. The best leaps in technology have been made by men who were more than a little bit off their rocker. Enter Mike Markham, who in 1995 claims to have cracked the code for time travel with stuff he had lying around the house. He was a 21-year-old electrical engineering major who loved building gizmos at home, but his magnum opus was a device he called the Jacob's Ladder, which was a personal time machine that could send a human being backwards or forwards in time. Now, I can't even begin to parse the explanation for the machine. They didn't hire me for my brain, but if you go hunting after this video, you'll be able to find some detailing how the machine works. But what I can tell you is that it was constructed from a laser from inside a CD player and a continuous arc between 2 poles. Again, I don't know how this works. I'm just reporting the facts. Markham claimed that his device was capable of generating such energy that when he threw a piece of sheet metal into it, it disappeared and reappeared seconds later, which sounds terrifying. I don't know if I want to be on a time machine that's reconstructing me Enterprise transporter style. There are just way too many accidents involved with stuff like that. Unsatisfied with just a piece of sheet metal traveling through the time stream, Markham set out on seeing what would happen if he hooked Jacob's Ladder up to a massive power grid and stole 6 transformers from a local station. This experiment would cause a blackout in the neighborhood, leading to Markham's arrest. Now, he would spend a few months in jail, but the incident garnered enough local attention that Markham became a bit of a local hero, and was stunned to discover that after his release, there were offers from aid from pretty much all over, from people offering to donate supplies, money, time, you name it. The people want to time travel. With all the newfound aid, Markham would spend the next 2 years working on the Jacob's Ladder ladder Mark II, having now rebuilt it to accommodate the size of a person. Updates from Markham would end around 1997 though, when he vanished from the public eye and the world at large. He missed a meeting with his parole officer, and when police responded to try and track Markham down, they found the warehouse that he was using as his personal workshop, but they didn't find him there. They just found burnt up machines, damaged electronics, and singed walls. So did Markham's machine work? Well, maybe when he comes back from time, he can tell us. Number 5. Well, first and foremost, if you were looking for any proof that the government definitely knows more about aliens than they let on, how about from the mouth of the three-letter organizations themselves? The CIA released a tweet in 2014, wow, obviously was meant to be taken in a joking manner, but still pretty illuminating, saying that throughout the 50s and 60s, they estimate that 50% of all sightings of unexplained aerial phenomena and UFOs were simply the CIA testing new aircraft. Out of context, the CIA admits they were behind 50% of all UFO sightings is an extremely attention-grabbing headline, and probably what I should have named this video. Would have got you to click better. And it is an attention-grabbing headline. At the time they were testing the Lockheed U-2 spy plane, codenamed Dragon Lady, which was able to fly at altitudes thought unreachable by a one-manned aircraft at the time. We know the CIA will always be a little bit more technologically advanced than they're willing to let on. That's just the nature of shadowy governments. But the conspiracy theorist in me has to wonder, is it even just the littlest bit possible that them releasing this could be a misinformation campaign? I mean, this is just what they're willing to admit, right? Who's to say what they won't admit? What if they put stuff like this out there so the next time you see something odd in the sky, you just dismiss it thinking, oh, that's just the CIA testing airplanes, instead of the more logical, reasonable answer that it's an alien spacecraft observing you from up above? And what if all I'm saying is just wild speculating and tinfoil hat level conspiracies because I'm trying to get views on video? It's more likely than you think. But them admitting they're responsible for most UFO sightings intones to me that they're aware of a lot more UFO sightings that are reported. Makes you wonder how much they research them all. Do you think they look at every blurry cell phone camera video posted to Reddit, or just the really serious ones that make the news? I'm hoping to get some answers someday, and I have a feeling that some of those answers are in this video. It won't all be wild speculation, I promise. And hey, if you want to see more alien stuff, click through. We've got boxes full of declassified documents, NASA stories, and videos that are just out of this world. Get it? So stay subscribed and stay scared, and I'll see you there. Number 4, the Guy Hoddle memo. So it's a pretty much an open book secret that the three-letter agencies have known about aliens in some way or another since they started writing things down. They don't hide it or pretend to hide it anymore, which is nice. They finally admitted that Area 51 even exists for the first time a couple years ago, so we could all use a little openness in our day-to-day. Let's take a look at one of the FBI's most talked about and most viewed documents, the Guy Hoddle memo. And despite being one of the most seen FBI memos, it's but a single-page document that was never followed up on. Well, it sounds like we should follow up on it. Guy Hoddle was the head of the FBI field office in Washington, and his report was addressed to the head of the FBI, one J. Edgar Hoover. The contents of the report were simple, but shocking. It detailed the descriptive encounter of an agent making a physical sighting of what they believed to be a UFO. It's dated 3 years after the Roswell incident, but it was reported in New Mexico for what it's worth. Here's a quote from the memo. The saucers were described as being circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. Now if you ask me, that is almost too perfect, isn't it? I mean, the memo lines up nearly perfectly with the stereotypical, cartoon description of aliens being little gray or green men flying around in flying saucers around New Mexico. The memo goes on to read that the agent claims they had found the saucers because an FBI high-powered radar in the area had detected it, and this radar detecting it had interfered with the controlling mechanism of the crafts. But despite all of this, which really seems like it's the paper trail screaming, proving, hey, aliens are out there, you should go check them out, the memo ends by saying no further evaluation was attempted, and the Hoddle memo was never followed up on, presumably crumpled up and thrown away. Director Hoover, I guess, thought it wasn't worth his time and disregarded it, leaving it now as nothing more than an incredibly odd piece of history. Number 3, Project Blue Book. Well, here's the thing. Even if Director Hoover at the FBI didn't see fit to look into the Hoddle memo, there were definitely other organizations that were looking into UFOs. Maybe it's not just the FBI, but I can tell you that the Air Force sure was. If you're an experienced UFO enthusiast, perhaps you're already very familiar with Project Blue Book, but if you're not, hey, let's talk about it. The project was officially started in 1952 and terminated in 1969. And the project had 2 main goals. 1. Confirm if UFOs were a threat to national security. And 2. Scientifically analyze any UFO-related data. Well, that seems like pretty strong evidence to me. Not that the project existed to see if UFOs are real, but rather to determine if they were a threat. That seems like they're writing and admitting like, no, we know, we just want to know if they're scary. And is that not the most human sentiment you've ever heard? If you guys learned nothing from Avatar, we gotta be making friends with aliens, not being afraid of them. In the years of Project Blue Book's operations, a stunning 12,618 reports were filed and collected. And those are just the ones that are officially recorded. Of those, interestingly, there were an individual 700 reports that were found to be unexplainable after research and intense analysis. Isn't that interesting? Now, a great number of these reports turned out to be the U-2 spy plane that we mentioned all the way back in point number 5, if you remember that far away. But that still leaves 700 completely unexplained sightings of aircraft that the USAF looked into and could not find answers for. The project was ultimately shut down in 1969, with the official explanation being given that, number 1, no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever given any indication of threat to our national security. And number 2, there has been no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. And number 3, there has been no evidence indicating the sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. Oh, well that sounds like kind of a bit of a bummer, doesn't it? They went through thousands of documents and declared that none of it was worthwhile evidence to suggest that aliens exist. Well, it's a shame that we're never going to mention any more things of the Air Force on this video, or any more things about pilots encountering aliens. I mean, that really blows. I mean, except for our next point. Take a listen. Number 2, the UAP report. Very recently, the Pentagon declassified a series of documents known internally as the UAP report, and it was basically the sequel to Project Blue Book, the streaming follow-up. And yeah, every single time we have an alien video, I'm probably going to have a little meltdown where I talk about how last year the government confirmed that they researched UFOs and that's what they spend your money on, and no one seemed to care about this, they just slipped it under the rug. I guess we were kind of busy with other stuff, but still, what happened to our curious minds, people? We learned that the various three-letter agencies in the States had been researching, analyzing, and scouting out sightings of UFOs, mostly because pilots just could not stop reporting them during training ops. One pilot, Lieutenant Ryan Graves, claims that he saw hundreds, maybe thousands in his career as a Navy pilot. One of the more famous ones is the Tic Tac sighting, referring to a massive oval-shaped aircraft that was spotted by 2 pilots. This one comes from 2004, and the 2 veteran pilots, Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate, were the ones who called it in. 2 respected, trustworthy Navy veterans. Their report reads that the objects were spotted almost out of nowhere, some 80,000 feet in the air, which would then descend rapidly towards the Pacific Ocean, then stop at around 2,000 feet and hover in place. Very normal airplane behavior. They would drop out of radar range or shoot directly up into the sky on a 90-degree angle. For weeks, Navy crew was watching these objects trying to determine just what they were. They certainly weren't American in origin, and they weren't recognized by any other organizations. To confirm what they'd seen, Slate and Fravor were sent off on a reconnaissance mission to get eyes on it. What they found was more confusing than either of the 2 men could ever have imagined. They reported back that the object they were seeing was like a giant Tic Tac, white-colored, oval-shaped, and 40 feet long. Far too big to be a drone, and it didn't maneuver in a way like an aircraft would, making erratic movements, staying out of reach of radars, as if it knew it was trying to stay undetected. The pilots flew towards a rendezvous point to touch down, and presumably cracked their windows open and asked each other, hey, what the hell was that? But as they flew towards the LZ, the UAP flew past them at a breakneck speed and then disappeared entirely. When questioned about it, Fravor said that it was unlike any aircraft he had ever seen in his life. I mean, that guy flew planes like every day for years, so he probably knows a thing or two. Number 1, non-terrestrial officers. Now, if you're like me, you're probably frustrated that you know the truth is so close within grasp behind closed doors. To know in your heart of hearts that there are answers to the unexplained just out of sight would drive you to do something crazy. Now, for most of us, all we can do is sit and speculate and maybe watch some lovely top 5 videos of a very handsome host talking about aliens. But for one Gary McKinnon, a Scottish computer programmer, he decided that wasn't enough and decided to take matters into his own hands. McKinnon was a genius computer hacker and had his sights set on the biggest prize he could imagine, going after NASA's servers to see if they had any hidden alien data just waiting to be found, in what was described as the biggest military hack of all time. Quite the conversation starter. Why would anyone risk their career, freedom, and livelihood on this? Well, Gary wanted the truth and he would do anything to get it. McKinnon claims he had insider knowledge that confirmed the US had suppressed anti-gravity technology reverse engineered from UFOs and free energy energy. In his own statement, McKinnon said, "This should not be kept hidden from the public when pensioners can't even pay their fuel bills." Yeah. Well, so what did McKinnon find? Well, he didn't find proof of the reverse-engineered UFOs that he'd been hoping for, but he found quite a lot that was remarkably illuminating. First up, a 400-page document called the Disclosure Project, outlining testimonials from government agents across multiple branches of service, reporting all their sightings and scientific analysis on unexplained flying objects. That would already be pretty impressive, but on top of that, McKinnon also managed to find a document entitled Non-Terrestrial Officers. Non-Terrestrial Officers? What? What? Is that just fancy talk for astronaut? Well, the document was a spreadsheet listing the names of NASA officers and employees who were to be transferred to new ships or to serve on board space stations. But here's where it gets weird. McKinnon noted that the names of these vessels listed did not appear to exist in any other database. And if that wasn't enough, McKinnon claims in his searching he saw images of aircraft that did not resemble anything he had ever seen. One in particular he describes as looking like a massive cigar-shaped craft floating over the northern hemisphere that did not look man-made. One wonders if that's the same as the Tic Tac ship. He said he was in a shock looking at the image and didn't think to take a photo. Now, after pulling off an unbelievable fast one on NASA, McKinnon couldn't resist a bit of cheeky cyber vandalism and edited NASA's website homepage with a bit of text that read, "Your security is crap, by the way." Now, I'm not endorsing hacking a government website, but that's one of the coolest things I've ever read. Now, I don't know how much you know about the United States government. Boy, do they just love it when you prove to them that they have a massive security breach in their most classified data. Presumably the only thing that kept McKinnon from being strapped to a car battery and thrown into a black van by the men in black was the fact that he lived in Scotland and was kind of hard to get a hold of. He was arrested by UK police, and the United States government tried their absolute hardest to have him extradited to the States to be tried for the fullest extent of his crimes. Honestly, I bet it was the note. I bet that's what really pushed them over the edge. McKinnon managed to avoid extradition and was protected by the Crown for serving out what would have been a 70-year sentence. But presumably he's not planning any road trips to the States anytime soon, and I'm sure NASA has improved their security just a little bit.